The problem is really big. It is profoundly big. So this is not about fossil fuel for electricity. This is about greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture. You got to decarbonize steel, chemicals, plastics, concrete, everything. The full dangers of climate change are obvious. Do we have enough resources in the world to do this?
Chu's the right guy to do this. He's got a Nobel Prize in physics. He actually deserved his Nobel Prize.
Our guest today is Steven Chu.
Welcoming Dr. Steven Chu.
Now we have the Secretary of Energy, Steven Chu.
Rediscovery is really important. You're not influenced by people's thinking.
Was that the time you knew you were going to win the Nobel?
I was just growing up and discovering the world through amateur experiments.
Right.
And if you look at a lot of the biographies of like great scientists, there's a lot of that going on when they were growing up. They were discovering on their own. They were discovering the rules by themselves out of textbooks. And that exploratory curiosity is what actually leads to new discoveries. If it's all from a textbook, it would limit your imagination. This really has been a random walk, and it continues to be random because we don't really have any sight of where we're going next. Thank you.
Hi, friends and fellows. Welcome to this special series of conversations involving personalities coming from a number of campuses, including Stanford University. The purpose of this series is really to unleash thought-provoking ideas that I think would be of tremendous value to you. I want to thank you for your support so far, and welcome to this special series. Hi, today we're honored to have the presence of Professor Steven Chu, who's a professor of physics and also of molecular and cellular physiology and environmental science and engineering at Stanford University. Steve, thank you so much for coming to our show.
Great to be here.
I want to ask you a very simple question about how you grew up, how you picked up science, and how you decided to become a scientist.
Well, it's easy. We were given no choice. Both sides of the family were scientists, and they wanted us to be scholars. And the extended family, not only my two brothers and I, but also the cousins who had emigrated to the U.S. Essentially in the late 40s. So we were thought, we had to be scientists, and it was assumed we would all get PhDs in science.
Why physics?
Physics was different. They weren't really wedded to physics. My father was a chemical engineer. I was a chemist. I had a civil engineer. I had a grand uncle who was a physicist, but I didn't know that he was a physicist much later. So that was a personal choice in high school. I loved its elegance. I loved the fact that a few simple ideas, and you could get very quantitative explanations. And I had a great physics teacher, 2 years,
right.
and he was inspirational. So
this was in high school?
This was in high school.
Oh my gosh.
In suburban, a bedroom community outside New York City called Garden City. It's the middle of Nassau County. And I remember to this day, he said, we're going to talk about very simple things, how things fall in gravity, pendulums, things like that. But it might seem really simple, but with that really simple thing, you can build a foundation, and you can build on that foundation for hundreds of years. And I was enchanted by that idea of this cumulative knowledge.
Your family and your siblings, some of them went to the Ivy League universities, and you went to Rochester. You've told me separately that it didn't stop you from winning a Nobel Prize.
Well, yes, I was the first in the extended family of the male people. They either two went to Harvard, one went to Princeton. My older brother went to Princeton. I applied to Yale and Princeton they interviewed me, but I got B's in German, well-deserved B's, maybe B minuses. And I wasn't, aside from a few courses, I wasn't really taking off until I'd say my senior year. I was living in the shadow of my older brother. And it turned out to be a good thing that I went to Rochester. Had I went to Princeton or Yale, I think I would have done well. But at Rochester, the teachers in math department and the physics department took me under their wing. And that was very different. I don't think I would have been treated that way. I was started getting invited to math parties, for faculty parties, as an undergraduate, but they didn't invite the graduate students.
Wow.
Right. So, and physics professors would invite me to dinner. It's not for a student faculty dinner. It was me with a faculty member and his spouse. So it was different. And that was good because you can imagine my self-confidence growing up in a brilliant family, an extended brilliant family. And so at Rochester, within one semester, I figured, hey, I can do this. and I was confident, but obviously, for example, I had to tell you a story. So I was a math major. I skipped the first year. And by the third year, I'm taking graduate courses. And I told one of the math professors, well, this course, linear algebra, I think I can teach it myself. Do I really have to take it? And they said, well, you're a math major. It's a required course. And I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll TE for the course. If I do a good job, will you give me credit for it? They said, sure.
Not a bad deal.
Not a bad deal. So that summer, I read the book that they used. Did a good job TEing for it. Said, yep, linear algebra.
Wow. You were interested in so many things when you grew up. There's a story about how you taught yourself how to play tennis by reading a book first. Explain that.
Well, first we were poor.
Okay.
So
There's no tennis court.
No country clubs. No tennis courts.
This was in St. Louis.
This
New
was
York.
in New York.
Okay.
When I was growing up, it was in junior high school.
Okay.
And I sort of kind of thought, I kind of like the game. I would do sports. We would, pick up basketball games, pick up football games. In Long Island, it would freeze, and then there's a little basketball court that had a little den, hockey. So I did all these sports, but tennis looked like fun. So I said, oh, okay. No one reads a book in basketball. You just watch people play basketball or baseball things. So I did all these sports, but tennis, is something different. Like golf, there's a lot of things that are sort of semi-unnatural. And so I had to start by reading a book. Then I would go to the backboard of my elementary school, a brick wall, and just started bouncing the ball and got good enough to first get in the junior varsity team, then the varsity team in high school. And then I could actually get coaching.
Amazing. Was that the foundation that allowed you to look at the world in a multidisciplinary manner?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was doing all sorts of things, not only sports, but, I had chemistry sets and erector sets. And in those days, it's not a preformed, snap these Legos together and you build something. Right. It was really nuts and bolts and things like that, and make big messes in the living room because the three brothers were in one bedroom the whole time we were growing up. So there was no space, the bunk bed. And so I did this in the living room. Very patient mother, she would just kind of, in between days, she would just put the mess to the side. But there was a big, a kind of a localized mess in the living room that she allowed. One thing, so I played with all these things, and I learned how to make what I would call is matchstick rockets. So you take a wooden matchstick and you just have it, so you just the ignitable phosphorus point, and you wrap aluminum foil around it, a little tight little thing, and a paper clip will leave a little hole, and another paper clip to suspend it. Put a match into that, it ignites, and when the flame, it would go, and we could shoot all the way across the kitchen. Okay. Now, the downside of this was I was playing with these matches in the fire, and we had a linoleum table. And my mother gets home, and the thing has been burned with all these pockmarks of burn marks on the linoleum. So she starts to cry. You just ruined our table, our kitchen table. So I said, don't worry, Mom. Take me to the lumberyard. We'll go buy a piece of, this Formica. I said, I'll make a new one, and it'll work. She took me to the lumberyard. I bought it, made it, fit it, replaced the old one. It looked like new. It's better than new. It was new. But so again, this is when I was in like grade school.
Yeah.
Right. I had enough confidence. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But just some stupid things too, like ruining the kitchen table.
Was that the time you knew you were going to win the Nobel?
Oh no! I was just growing up and discovering the world through amateur experiments.
Right.
And if you look at a lot of the biographies of like great scientists, there's a lot of that going on when they were growing up. They were discovering on their own. They were discovering the rules by themselves out of textbooks. And that exploratory curiosity is what actually leads to new discoveries.
Yeah.
If it's all from a textbook, it would limit your imagination.
How do you see the young generation nowadays? Do they have the same kind of curiosity that your generation grew up with?
Well, to be fair to them, I think many of them do, but it's stamped out early. The educational system tries to stamp it out.
Yeah.
But also for liability safety reasons, you can't do now what I could do then. I started with an AC Gilbert chemistry set, but there's a local chemistry supply store. So I would go to this chemistry supply store, and you start with this little kit of mostly safe stuff. And I started buying all sorts of chemicals, which they had no right selling to a kid, including nitrates for my rockets. And so you can't do stuff like that today. But a lot of it is pre-programmed. And sadly, most of the kids today are playing with computer games.
Right.
And it's very different. They don't fix things anymore. You can't fix a car anymore the same way you can do it. Right. You bring it in, and your car computer talks to the shop computer, and they,
Will that
secrets.
affect creativity or innovation going forward?
Yes.
Or scientific discoveries?
I think it will be different because of this hands-on experience of making things, and you get this intuition on how to make things. I've got brilliant graduate students and postdocs now, but they don't have that built-in hand intuition. And when we're discussing about what to do, how to design something, virtually no one has the intuition that comes from making stuff since you were little and knowing how things and how to design things. So I'd sit there in front of them, and we'd have these long group meetings and say, oh, well, so they'd show me designs. Oh, well, that's maybe, but how about this? And da-da-da-da. And they say, oh, that's better. But it's, or they're thinking of what to do.
Yeah.
Remarkably, they will go to a computer CAD thing, and they do this on the thing, right? And they get a laser to read it out and everything. And I'm trying to get them, no, take the machine shop course and feel it, right?
They're not doing that.
Well,
they're being encouraged. ChatGPT to do
it. Let's say I'm trying to encourage them to do it, to make things with their own hands, because then you can go faster and you could come up with something new.
Let's talk about the Nobel. You won in 1997, right? On how to trap atoms with a process called the optical molasses.
Right.
Explain that to a layman like me.
It's not so complicated.
Okay.
Think of the following. You think of an atom, and when light gets absorbed by them, it re-emits, and re-emits in all directions. And so think of this as a big bowling ball, the atom,
and
the photons is little BBs, and lots of little BBs hitting it. And so each one is a teeny tiny change in the velocity of the atom, but there's billions a second, millions of billions a second. So being pummeled by BBs, you can do this. Okay, so need one other thing. So you say, okay, you can push this bowling ball around. What does cooling mean? Cooling means that it has some random energy, random velocity. It could be going to the left, it could be going to the right. So there's another trick, and that is if you take a laser, there's a very sharp resonance where the BBs will scatter off the bowling ball, otherwise they just go through. You can tune the resonance of the laser so when this big atom is going towards the laser light, it's tuned into resonance, so it scatters more light. Meanwhile, the beam from the other side is running away from it, the Doppler shift. The visualization of the Doppler shift is when I walk towards you, I sound a little higher in frequency, and when I walk away from you, I sound a little lower in frequency. Okay? So that frequency shift is now atom going this. It sees the Doppler shift. I'm in resonance. It's running away from this, and it's out of resonance. So what does it do? It scatters more from here. Self-correcting. If it goes the other way, from here. You don't have to know where it's hitting. Goes right, goes left. So I said, oh, that's neat. How do you cool in 3D? X, Y, Z. And it said, this is simple and it's going to work. And I set about doing this when I was at Bell Laboratories. I told my director, I was the department head by then, and he had shut down all the effort to trap atoms because they had other scientists working on it for about 10 years. Didn't work. Nowhere close. One of the lead scientists named Art Ashkin was trying to get me interested in this because I'd done a few other very difficult experiments in my career. My director looks at me and says, okay, you've earned the right to do this because you did this other thing, positronium. Don't ask anyone else to do it. You can use your technician postdoc, but don't ask anyone else to join you. So I said, okay. The whole experiment, from the conception to starting to sit down and write the paper, 1 year. Now, if I was in academia, it would have taken 5 or 6 years.
Right.
But the major thing about this whole thing is, then I sat down to write the paper, and Art Ashkin says, you should read this paper that was published 10 years ago by two scientists who were well known, Art Shallow, Ted Hench. Art Shallow, by then, had gotten a Nobel Prize for laser, and he was a co-inventor of the laser. I read the paper and said, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I did. They said, surround the atom with light and use the Doppler shift. It was a 2-page paper. And then after I did the experiment, started to read more of the literature. I'd just plunge in and just do the experiment. Don't read books, just do it. That's what I was doing when I was a kid. I still continue
to repeat of what you did.
Yes, I still continue to do this to this day. Long before, if I go in a new field, I'm just thinking, oh, what about this? What about this? And then afterward, you can start to read the literature. So going back to this optical molasses, said it's going to work. Then I read that with this language, surround the atoms with light, there were a few Russian proposals of getting uniform. That's wrong, because it turns out for other technical reasons, that would be absolute wrong geometry. And so I chose the right geometry because I wasn't influenced by subtleties of language. And then I come here. This is afterwards. So I did that in 1985, published. Right. Started in 84. Come here in 87. Art Shallow both Ted Hench and Art wanted me to come a couple of years, and I just kept on saying no. Finally,
you're a Berkeley guy.
Finally, I said, okay, what will it take to get into? Because I was by then 8.5 years at Bell Labs. You don't spend your career there. So Art becomes a good friend of mine. I say, Art, as I read more about the history, and you got a Nobel Prize in 1983. I did this experiment in 1985. In your Nobel Prize lecture, you had 40 references of all the spectroscopic work you did with you and also with Ted Hench, you didn't even mention this paper. He says, in 1983, I didn't know it was going to be important. And they never tried it. They didn't realize how easy it was. They could have tried it. And so that's where rediscovery is really important. You're not influenced by people's thinking. There was a toss-away thing for them, but it transformed atomic physics. That cooling method. And
you basically slowed down the speed, right?
Yeah, you slow down the speed from the speed of Mach 2 supersonic jet planes to how fast an ant walks. Once they're really going slowly.
It's a lot easier.
Oh, very subtle forces. You can push them around, you can hold things. And then the craziest thing was, then we tried trapping. Once you got them cold, then we had a few false starts. And finally, we used an idea that Ariashin had proposed in 1978, but didn't take it seriously. Why? Because you had to focus the laser beam really hard, and there was no volume. Even with our wonderful cooling, which had 1 million atoms per cubic centimeter, the depth of how hard you had to focus the beam, you would find 1/10 of an atom in the volume. It's ridiculous. No one's going to try that. 1/10 of an atom out of 1 million. And that was the first time the world had these cold atoms.
Right.
And so, no, it's not going to work. And it's just like, you know what? I started to think stupidly, well, if the atom's moving around and it falls into the trap, it will get stuck there, but we're always cooling it. But you can do the diffusion equation, and there's nearby atoms, and they're going to fall in, and they're going to fall in. And maybe in a half a second, you're going to get thousands of atoms. So you just want random walk cooling so it worked. And I used to joke and got in trouble. After it worked, I said, well, it's sort of like you're on a weekend and you're watching people stagger out of a bar.
Right.
And then you come in the next morning, and what do you find? You find them passed out in the gutter, not on top of a car. Why? Because that's the lowest energy state. And I said it's like a drunken sailor walk, and then all of a sudden I got angry letters from sailors from the U.S. Navy.
Pretty accurate description, though.
But the amazing thing was, Art says, well, we can try this with a little polystyrene sphere, which is a lot bigger, so the forces are bigger, and we just use water, and the water is like the optical molasses, keeps it cold, and you can trap it. So he tries this in his lab, works. Within a month, the atoms work, okay? We didn't think the particle stuff was a big deal, but it turned out to be a big deal and got him a Nobel Prize. But the interesting thing was, he had a focused beam to levitate particles in 1970. He had proposed a single beam trap in 1978. In 1971, he had done all those things. And it took optical molasses and an atom trap to say this is going to work in a particle in water. It was crazy. It was just one step missing.
And you came up with it?
Yes. Well,
did you know that it was going to be life-changing?
No, not at all.
Wow.
I don't consider it more... Life change is not the important part. It actually changed.
It was a hell of a breakthrough.
It changed physics.
Yeah.
It really changed physics. And so then Art discovered that his little trap, you can not only trap particles, he discovered you can trap bacteria. So he started messing around with bacteria and little organelles within yeast. Okay, and you can show you could pull these things. So there I was in 1986, 87. We gotten molasses to work, the atom trap to work, the particle trap to work, and then the so-called magneto-optic trap, which became the workhorse. It's so easy. It's a undergraduate science project. And so just before I left Bell Labs, I said, look, you can trap E. coli, we can trap atoms. I'm going to trap a molecule, a single biomolecule. I'll attach a little polystyrene sphere to this biochemically, and then you can hold on and manipulate this single molecule. You can do measurements in single molecules. So I came to Stanford in 91, 92, got it to work. There was a year later, I was at a conference that Art was at. It was actually in Stockholm, I think. And Art was in the front row and he says, "You said you could do this, and I didn't believe you. Wow." And he immediately glommed onto that. And so he got the Nobel Prize for the optical tweezer in biology, which I'm very happy about because, when I got my Nobel Prize, I said, "Art, I'm sorry, but you were the brainchild of, a lot of the stuff you were talking about for 15 years.
Long time ago, yeah.
And,
in the 70s.
And so I would have loved to have shared it with you. But, so it was good. It was nice that it was recognized that it also has been transforming biology, which I think is great.
You were the director of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, right? As a physicist or as a scientist, how would you differentiate the Einsteins and the Oppenheimers and the Newtons of the world from mere mortals like me?
Or mere mortals like me?
No. You're up there, man. I'm way down here.
It is possible, actually.
What makes them the way they are?
Well, without disrespecting a lot of scientists, I would say that most scientists think incrementally, and they look at what's in progress and think, what can I do to inch it forward? What Newton and Einstein did, and to a lesser extent Oppenheimer, but Oppenheimer was more a theorist who followed the math.
Right.
The other two were very different. Conceptually, just look at the world a very, very different way. And so Newton had to invent the mathematics to figure out what gravity did.
Yeah.
So he had this conception of this universal gravitational law, and he had to invent the mathematics to show that it was consistent with all the precise, by then reasonably precise astronomical observations of how planets revolve around the sun. Okay. Amazing, right? And then he also knew that it wasn't complete. In fact, he said the fact that one body can act in another body at a distance, seemingly with nothing in there, no person of sane mind, I'm paraphrasing, of competent facilities would ever dream that this is, but I leave that as a discussion for future people. Okay? Just, this is the law, and it works. And the same law and his laws of motion allowed him to calculate the speed of sound, the this, the that. So he did all of this stuff. And it was amazing. Okay, so then Einstein comes along, and his greatest contribution was this deep thinking where he started to look at things very differently. And his biggest contribution was the general theory of relativity. And he imagines himself in a spaceship you can't see outside, and it has uniform acceleration. So what do you feel? You feel some forces pulling you towards the bottom of the spaceship. And he said, you can't really tell the difference between uniform acceleration and on near a gravitational body where you feel this uniform force. So there has to be there is no difference in principle. And so he started doing very conceptually simple things. Okay, if spaceships uniformly accelerate by a lot, and you look at a pulse of light going across. Okay, if it's constant velocity, the pulse of light looks like it's going down in a straight line, but it's accelerating, so it looks like the pulse of light is falling.
Right.
So he says, oh, that means gravity must bend light. But if light is what we use to measure shortest distance between 2 points and everything else, that means the real geometry is now warped by the presence of gravity. Amazing, right? He said, time will also be, again, these very simple freshman physics, if you will, thought experiments. So he starts casting around, well, what mathematics is self-consistent? Now, Einstein hated mathematics.
Yeah.
He skipped his math classes when he was in college.
Yeah.
He had a good
Can you
friend.
imagine if he would have left it? The world would be a different place.
No, but Marcel Grossman was his good buddy, and he said, Marcel, go and take notes and tell me what they're talking about, because I'm not really interested in math. And many quotes of Einstein has told this regarding math. So Marcel Grossman, he starts talking to Marcel about this. He's got this problem. Einstein's smart enough to realize he can't think of a self-consistent mathematical description.
Right.
So Marcel says, this guy Riemann, you should read this stuff, because I think his whole curved space framework fits. And Einstein said, oh my gosh. And so with Riemannian geometry, boom, it became a complete theory within less than a year after he was pointing to the right mathematician. But conceptually, you can see it was totally different. It's just a wild, crazy, simple ideas told in completely new ways. If Einstein wasn't alive, general relativity might have taken another 20, 30, 40 years. You don't know. Quantum mechanics was a group effort, of which Einstein was a major contributor, and there's very essential things. Again, goofy, he didn't really believe in the end the mathematics, that it was a complete picture. He believed in mathematics, that he didn't think it was a complete picture. That was a philosophical thing more than anything else. But when Einstein, in those days, he would just think things in this totally simplistic, beautiful way. And so those people, to physicists, is just amazing.
If Newton didn't discover calculus at the age of 24, how much longer do you think it would have taken?
No, he had a competitor in calculus. There's a guy named Leibniz.
Oh, yeah.
And Newton was a fiercely competitive and so a not nice guy.
So he would have taken maybe a few more years.
Yeah, but the universal law would have taken longer. His laws of gravity and his laws of motion, you need the calculus and those laws.
Right.
And so it was that combination. Now, Newton, as I said, was, he's
special.
He's special, but he's also very competitive. There's a guy, a contemporary of his. First, they had a dispute with Leibniz, who had really invented. They both invented it, but he didn't like Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke, the Hooke compound microscope, is very eminent. They're both revered in that time and still are in terms of their scientific contributions. And he didn't like Hooke. Maybe Hooke didn't like him, I'm sure, back. and then I was told, I don't know if this is true, but that famous quote, the reason I see so far is because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Hooke was a very short man.
Good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. But what would it take for somebody to become a Newton? Is it like just intense?
No, it's something
process
different.
Of
no, we're talking about once in a century type of people, literally.
Yeah.
And it's this combination of really looking at things very differently.
Yeah.
Another example, Maxwell.
Yeah.
Halfway in between, comes up with Maxwell's equations. During that whole time, all physics would describe how energy would go through waves, water waves, sound waves, things like that. There was always a medium. So Maxwell said, okay, there's got to be a medium that this light can go through, even though we're not sure what it is. Because, you can pump out and make it a vacuum and light just does this thing and just travels. Right. So he constructed something. And in the end, he said, I'm very unhappy with this mechanical model I'm constructing. I'm just making this up. And so in the end, I'm going to say something is what these things are doing are described by the equations, Maxwell's equations. And forget about the mechanical model. A century later, along comes Einstein and says, that is a huge insight, that you don't need a mechanical thing to describe something, that the fields, the equations, the mathematics become the reality. And that changed the way we thought of physics. Just like his, equations of general relativity, okay? And, the idea that mass could change space and time and bend it, do it is
Crazy.
Crazy. Right.
I mean, if I was there, I would have thought it was crazy.
Well, when he got his Nobel Prize, they gave it to him for the photoelectric effect, which was a springboard for quantum mechanics, because at that time, they weren't quite sure general relativity was going to be right.
Crazy good.
But he could have got a Nobel Prize for about 3 things.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, I want to switch topic here. You became Secretary of Energy.
Mm-hmm.
Were you excited?
I was excited because I thought by then that climate, the energy problem, the climate problem, all the largest sustainability issues, was the issue science had to solve.
Right.
It's going to solve other problems, but that's the major one, and it would take decades. This is, and I had met someone who's, when I met him 2 weeks after the election, he said, I have 2 major priorities in my administration. President Obama, then President-elect. He said, I want to reform healthcare, and I got to do something about the climate. Those are my 2 highest priorities. And everybody's telling me you should be the Secretary of Energy. So we talked for an hour, just the 2 of us. He asked me about what I felt about this, that, and as we chatted, I guess, okay, this guy's pretty good, and there's no space. And I also said during that interview or whatever that, look, if you choose me, I asked you that I know what happens with cabinet positions, that there's a lot of political payback time. And
you chose to be different.
and the president's people say you should have this one as your deputy secretary, these as your undersecretary, and they tell you who you should hire. Right? It's payback. And most cabinet people are payback. They're early supporters, they're former.
Right.
Okay. And so this guy, number one, no political connection, never campaigned for him, never campaigned for anyone, and no political connection. So he chose me for competence, knowledge. And then I said, will you let me hire who I want to hire? He said, yes. He kept his word. I said, you can make suggestions, but in the end, it's going to be on me. He said, yes. And then I did something no cabinet member, I don't think, before or since has done, which is I was a practicing scientist. I knew a lot of brilliant people. And I started getting on the phone and saying, hey, you want to come join me? That's how I got Ruum Majumdar. That's how I got Ramesh. That's how I got a few dozen people. And then they came in and started with me and them. Okay, who else are we going to hire? And we're looking around the country's best people.
Brilliant people.
Yeah. Never happened before. This is something assigned to some lawyer 3 levels down. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I know.
and it's crazy because when the Secretary of Energy, whose scientists they know and respect, and they couldn't believe I was going to work for a government. I said, I know, but look.
They probably thought you're not going to last.
I said, this guy's special. And look, it's simple. We're here to save the world. Come join me. Was it 2 years, 4 years? I don't care. 6 years. I was thinking I was going to be there 8 years. My wife, after 4 years, had different ideas, but never mind that. She, for very good reasons, did not like DC. And so then it's only after I left and I realized how special Obama was.
Yeah.
He was making appointments, not political payback. He was making appointments looking for the best people, including some of his political rivals, like Hillary Clinton. She's a very smart lady, okay? And And I knew he had trusted me as a scientist. So the little minions around him,
Right.
and that true in every government, they're always worried about how the public and how the press might spin things. And I didn't worry because I knew the president had full confidence in me. So I started making decisions only based on science and merit. Didn't have to worry about the politics because the president had my back. Similarly, when I brought these really great people in, I saw my role as to block and tackle for them and to brainstorm with them. But I would never direct, even if I disagreed, I would not overrule them.
Right.
But you don't do that with good people. You can discuss, you're sure you want to do it, but in the end, it's your decision. And the blocking and tackling was noticed because these guys, they were trying to work hard. They were 60 hours a week. So some of the career guys, these guys making us look bad. Gotta be kidding. Or, Bill Brinkman and Arun Majumdar wanted to go and talk to Congress. And they said, no, you can't do this. Only the secretary or the deputy secretary are allowed to talk directly to Congress. And I said, no. I trust these guys. They can talk directly to Congress. They're not going to be scripted. Right? And
wow.
Right. So I was blocking and tackling, but they were good friends of mine, and also brainstorming. We'd just sit around and then again, that's something I would see around in a conference room with people who, 5 levels down, thinking about what should we fund, how good is this, how good is that. And then when the RPE things, Arun also conveyed that to his people. He's not going to overrule them, but he's going to say, and the thing was, the program managers said they were on their toes. They said, we've got to really know what we're doing, because in the end, we're going to talk to Arun and Steve, and they're going to sit there and ask us questions. And there'll be technical questions, and they'll know if we're BSing.
Right.
And so that was the other great thing about this. And the whole model was what I experienced at Bell Labs. Very flat organization.
Right.
There was no hierarchy.
Right.
And it could be sometimes a little unfriendly, but you're seeking the truth. And I said, and I wanted that spirit of Bell Laboratories to be in the people we brought in the Department of Energy.
You spoke with realism about the challenges of attaining sustainability.
Yes.
Attaining carbon neutrality, right? And you started speaking like that when you were in the government, and you're still speaking like that.
Right.
You're one of very few. I mean, there's a lot of optimists out there, but not realistic. Right?
I'm both an optimist, but also realistic.
Yeah.
That all the pledges of zero carbon emissions by 2050.
Yeah.
I mean, this is zero carbon emissions in every sector.
Right.
Including agriculture.
Yeah.
Are we going to get there? No.
Yeah.
And are we going to hold to, 450 parts per million? No, we're going to go over that in about 15 years. We're going to go to...
And you mentioned 3 degrees.
Yes.
Just last week when we were in Korea.
I think it's more likely 3 than 2, for sure.
Yeah. And there's still a lot of people that are still talking in 1.5 degree.
Well, when I was lab director, and I took that job because I said, I don't want to apply. I'm happy doing my research. And then I thought, well, look, I'm already going around talking about climate change. This is a great laboratory.
Right.
It was the first job, or they trained graduate student postdoc, maybe 3 dozen Nobel laureates. That's a good track record.
Yeah.
15 Nobel laureates who worked for the lab, and say, I'm talking about energy and climate change, and I don't want to be director of a Department of Energy lab where I could get some of maybe the best scientists start thinking about technical solutions. That's why I said, finally, okay, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And so when I was off the job, I immediately, day one, started talking about, hey, we have to think about this. And some of my friends at Berkeley Lab said, well, we don't know anything about energy. And I said, neither do I. We're going to teach ourselves. And that's what we did. Before it became a big financial support item. This is important. And I used to say, there are going to be Nobel Prizes in the science discoveries that come into the solutions. They will be such good science that will earn Nobel Prizes. But don't do it for the Nobel Prize. Do it because we need to, this is the mother, necessity of all, invention. Necessity is the mother of invention, and this is the biggest of all necessities.
Right.
And so far, too, the blue light emitting diode and batteries. There'll be more.
You think those are going to win Nobel?
They won Nobel.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Lithium-ion battery and blue LEDs. They won a Nobel Prize already.
Okay. More to come.
There'll be more to come, for sure. Very exciting science, but do it because we're trying to solve the world problem. And I still believe that. I still think it is the most important problem that we have to solve. And it needs policy, for sure. It needs public support. It needs the public to understand what the stakes are, which is very hard for them to understand. It seems abstract. Well, maybe in the last half dozen years.
But how are we going to get there, though? I mean, at the moment, we're powered to the extent of around 6 terawatt. We're planning to get to 12 terawatts in the next, 10 to 20 years. Mm-hmm. How do we get there in a cool way? I mean, in an environmentally friendly way.
Right. Difficult. Okay, so here's the problem. We have wind, we have solar, great technologies. We need to electrify, but as you go more and more towards renewables like wind and solar that aren't steady, can't be banked on, and require a lot of area, okay? Then energy storage becomes immense, okay? And then depending on the country you're in, if you're South Korea, if you're Hawaii, if you're any of these places, you don't have a lot. Hawaii has lots of sun. South Korea doesn't have very much sun, and their wind is mediocre. And so then what do you do? And so what those countries do now is they import most of their energy, mostly fossil. But they have nuclear. But there's a big debate about nuclear. Right. So I'm trying to convince people.
Talk about that, man.
The question is, let's not talk about what we like and dislike. Talk about our choices.
Right.
And the choices are for something compact you can turn on. It's going to be natural gas in the future.
Sure.
We'll evolve from coal because it's too poisonous in many other respects. Mm-hmm. So I see natural gas, I see nuclear as compact storage you can turn on when you run out of batteries. And the prospect in the next 20 years of batteries that are so effective and so cheap that they can run for a month on batteries just isn't going to be there. The big goal is, when will we get to 3 days?
Yeah.
In a couple of decades. Okay, so just 3
that
days.
Long. 2 decades.
2 decades to get to 3 day around the world. So I know I work on batteries. I'm working on utility scale batteries. They got to be cheap. They got to be reliable. So I'm thinking, okay, nuclear should come back and people should have an open mind. So I talked about the safety of nuclear and that it's irrational. And you have to gently try to convince them that you eat a banana, you eat bok choy.
I love that bok choy. Example used.
And the amount of radiation you've just eaten will be 1,000-fold more than eating a heavy fish diet of fish caught next to Fukushima. Okay? So, and oh, by the way, the banana is not bad for you. It's okay. And you continue to eat bok choy because the radiation level is so low, it's not going to endanger your health. And so you have to think, but you think about burning coal or even natural gas and the nitrous oxide, the particulate matter, these things. Those are, so I'm trying to help convince people in a talking down to way to try to say, that you have to understand the risks you're taking that aren't really risks.
Right.
And so this is not a risk. And if you don't do this and your energy prices go up, your economy will suffer a lot.
Yeah. Sustainability or climate change is a much easier problem for developed economies. It's a much, much more difficult problem for the less developed or the developing, if not the poor. Right. Most of the people out there are still worried about putting food on the table. You've got the demand side, supply side. Demand side is easy. We can socially re-engineer. From today onward, stop using coal. From tonight or tomorrow, start using whatever that's environmentally friendly. They'll do that if they can afford it.
If they can afford it, that goes back to it. Right. Especially in developed, I agree with you.
Right.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about countries with huge fiscal space limitations, right? And monetary space limitations. The supply side is also partly solvable from a technological standpoint. You've got nuclear, wind, solar, and whatever, and you can tailor each one of these to whatever the demand is, right? The problem is the economics. The economics is a lot more manageable within the developed economies.
Right.
For the less, it's, we're exposed. And I speak as a developing country citizen, right? I think it's going to be realistically difficult to resolve. We're just going to have to be patient until the economics would make sense. Because you got to drive the cost down to at least, or at most, 4 cents on a kilowatt hour, right?
Right. Oh, I think
preferably less.
No, you want it to be 2 cents, 1 cent.
Yeah,
1 cent.
Right.
You're competitive with anything.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's going to take a long time, and to drive things down from 10, 12, 15, 20 to less than 4 cents.
Yes. So
it requires, I think, some sort of geopolitical subsidization.
I agree with you.
At the rate that these guys are so fiscally limited, monetarily limited.
Right. No, I agree absolutely with that the rich countries have to help the poor countries.
Right.
And the poorer countries are the ones where you have the most population growth.
Right.
And because of that, you also have other needs. And as you say, all those reasons. So you look on how you can structure. First, you get the cost of financing down. That part could be pretty easy because you just need to backstop.
Yeah.
If the loan goes south for a few years or the project goes south. Okay. The DOE program showed how effective that was. It didn't lose the government money, but it allowed things to really accelerate.
Right.
The cost of capital is everything in developing countries. And so you want to aggressively put in play these areas where you lower the cost of capital. And then after that, then there are what I would call some old habits and established sectors in all these things we're talking about, whether it's the primary energy source, coal, natural gas, whatever, or in any industry. And they want to say, okay, this is the way we do business. We know this works. The first forays into that have to be subsidized and backstopped by a government to get a foothold. So people can see with their own eyes that it can work. I was at a conference years ago, like 15 years ago, and it was the Oslo Energy Conference, where I was listening to a person say that solar is very unreliable. The sun doesn't always shine. What you really need is a diesel generator, and while you generate your electricity from diesel, it's really expensive. Okay, coal is different story, but that's what he was saying, and I was saying, have a diesel generator as backup. Okay, but if 3/4 of your energy comes from solar, that when the sun is shining, you can pump water and for irrigation, you can purify water, which needs electricity, you can store energy in cell phones, And the LED lights, which were just beginning to turn, you can do a lot. Okay. But so I saw the incumbents starting to say, no, you shouldn't trust these things. And a lot of unscrupulous business people trying to sell junk LEDs, junk batteries, junk.
To some of us.
Yes, mostly to developing countries. Yeah. And it's just atrocious. China was trying to unload appliances to sub-Saharan Africa. They weren't allowed to sell in China because they were such low efficiency. But sub-Saharan Africa, the governments are subsidizing energy. They're subsidizing electricity. So they were unloading junk on poor developing countries. And so there's got to be something that says you're not allowed to do that. If you're not allowed to sell this in your own country because of your own efficiency standards, because you realize it's costing your country and your people more money, why should you be able to sell it in another country? Because you got inventory, or you've got a factory that makes the junk? So there are things like that can help. But in the end, and now coal is really cheap, and
we got a lot of those in Indonesia.
Yeah. And that's a problem, because the temptation to scrape out the coal and burn
it's easy and cheap.
And it is so bad for people's health.
Yeah, but there's no other choice.
Right.
I mean, if you get me nuclear at a cost-effective rate, done. We'll close the coal mines today.
Well,
if you get me cheap solar, if you get me cheap hydrogen or whatever.
That's the other thing. That's a scientific goal.
Yeah.
You can go to countries that have abundant wind and solar and hydro and all these other things, make the stuff there, make the hydrogen there, convert it to ammonia, or even natural gas.
Right.
And we can ship ammonia and natural gas and super tanker type things.
Right.
So it's like you're importing coal, except now you don't have all the downsides and the poisonous particulate matter and the SOx and the NOx and the climate stuff.
Right.
But it's got to be competitive. You can't pay twice as much. Absolutely cannot pay twice as much.
No.
10% more, it's okay.
Yeah. Why is nuclear so unpopular?
Fear. There's a primal fear. It's unknown. Yeah. It's it's like when you hear the word cancer, you get scared.
Right.
Even though you get more cancers from coal than from nuclear by a long shot.
Right. But the facts are startlingly easier to swallow.
Yes.
Than what people tend to portray.
Well, genetically modified crops.
Right.
We've been genetically breeding plants and animals for hundreds and thousands of years, since the beginning of the agricultural revolutions, okay? That's okay. Then along comes science, and then we used to actually irradiate things with radiation, just smash up the DNA, and then see what grows out of that. Okay, that's shotgun. The chance of getting a Frankenstein plant from that stuff was like crazy. Now all of a sudden, there's a beautiful surgical way of introducing genes, but then it's creepy, because then it's these scientists in white coats who are going to be not completely to be trusted, and so that's the Frankenstein they envisioned, the Dr. Frankenstein. So there's a innate fear of that, and there's also pushing economically that you don't want to be upended if you're a traditional supplier of seeds or this and that. Okay, and then Monsanto did a terrible thing of genetically modifying something so you had to go back to them for more seed. Okay, which is very different than genetically modified golden rice for vitamin A deficiency. Probably saves 500,000 lives a year from young children. But the next generation of seeds still have that gene, so that farmers can plant it. BT eggplant, and this genetically modified, you don't have to use poisonous pesticides. It stays the gene. Now, the insects are going to figure out a way for that one. So you need a couple of things, but you get rid of insecticides, pesticides that people in Pakistan and India are drowning in this stuff, and it's expensive. And you don't make it so that it's an intended obsolescence for the farmers. So those are good stories. People should be saying, this is the power of this. And you need this in order to feed a growing population.
Right.
And it's going to be cheaper. But there's this inherent fear stoked by incumbents. Not the incumbent who said, you need diesel. Solar's not trustworthy. Says, no, you can have the diesel. You sit there. It's the operating costs that kill you for the diesel, not the generator.
And the pollution too.
And the pollution.
So I live in some of those places.
Where you have noisy diesel generators. Yeah.
So what's the way forward? I mean, you've talked about 3 sectors, right? That I think we need to focus on to usher the sustainability narrative, right? Agriculture, infrastructure, and power. Yeah, we get it. But
you need a few things. You need people in the development who are importing this technology to the developing world to be absolutely scrupulously honest.
Right.
And they're doing it because they're trying to help the world. They're not trying to do it for a quick buck.
Right.
And pulling off second-tier stuff. Because there are a bunch of people like that. They're like war profiteers. It's the same sort of thing. Unscrupulous, greedy. In it, they're going to get out in 10 or 20 years. They'll have a fortune, they retire. Somehow, society has got to figure out how to police against those people. Those people won't stop because they suddenly become altruistic. You've got to get government to say, no, you're not allowed to do this. Or this other country saying, no, you're not allowed to pawn off your junk on us. And we started this clean energy ministerial where we started talking about energy efficiency and appliance standards. And we had South African representatives say, well, that's a lot of infrastructure to appliance standards. First I said, it's going to save you money. So we get that. But if you have a standard.
Long term.
Short term. You buy a refrigerator, you buy fans. Biggest cooling thing in India is fans. Those overhead fans, those things could be 60% efficient. They could be 90% efficient.
Yeah.
It's cheaper to build a 60% efficient one.
Yeah.
Okay. India, a lot of electricity is stolen and a lot of it's subsidized. So, who pays the cost? In the end, it's the people. So there could be regulations for that. And then you make sure that these development things, so when solar does make sense, when it does make sense for this and that, do it. And then wait for some technology. Appliance efficiency standard says you don't need to set up a big apparatus like we have in the United States in the Department of Energy. You're right, it takes too much know-how and money and everything. Just watch what the developing countries do, follow a couple of years behind, because once a new technology, it gets cheaper, learning curve, cheaper. So you don't want to be first adopters. The first electric vehicle is $100,000. You want to wait for them to be $30,000, and right. So you can fall behind in your standards, and you can know what the market is doing, and it's still you're much better off than having no standards. So there are ways of letting the rich countries be the first adopters.
Right.
First adopters are usually rich people who want to do it because they love technology or they feel they have to do it for other things. But the big breakthrough would be this 20 or 30,000. The car that undersells internal combustion engine cars, first cost, it's already better operating expense. First cost, it has to be first cost too. Yeah. And so those are things that I see very clearly as the challenges and how important it is to actually get people to move in the right direction. Once you have those technologies, you don't need policy. People talk about the political will.
I agree.
Better technology?
I agree. I'm a much bigger believer of technology as opposed to policy. And policy is a little more exposed in developing countries. It's more difficult to reshape.
Let the rich countries do the experiments on the policy side.
Correct.
They're the ones who are going to first outlaw internal combustion engine vehicles. Correct. I don't expect Indonesia or India to do this first. They shouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Even though, the air pollution from those 2 cycles is terrible. It's okay.
Yeah, we love coal.
So I mean, so that's my view: is let the first movers be the rich countries. They can afford it.
Yeah.
And if there's a mistake, if they're forcing something too early, they'll know about it. Already, this very aggressive, no more internal combustion engines by 2030, then they're bringing it, well, maybe 2035, which, as someone who really cares about climate, that's a sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
2030 is just around the corner. The price won't be right by 2030. It's just outlawed.
I'm smelling optimism in your tone in that in the near foreseeable future, technologically, things are going to be available cheaply.
Now, having said that, we're still being emitting lots of carbon by 2050 and maybe even by 2075. And so the other thing that there's a split among some people, I said, okay, because of that, because we're going to go over 450 and probably 550, we need to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it safely. Because the time of damage is 50 years to several hundred years. It'll take the glaciers to reach the new states in several hundred years, maybe half a millennium. Because the bottoms of the oceans are so cold, the fact that you've got carbon dioxide barrier now, a heat barrier, so sun energy coming in, roughly the same, energy going out less. So what do? You warm up the ocean. So most of the heat that should have been changing our weather is used to warm up the ocean, but like you're melting ice cubes, okay? That is known within 20%. It's roughly 40 years to get 2/3 of the way to the final temperature. Get rid of the carbon dioxide before you warm up the ocean, before the weather really changes. Because what we've already done, if you don't do that, we're in much worse territory. It's already written in, but it's not written in. Unlike cancer mutations, which you don't reverse, we can get the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. No? So other people say, no, you can't do that because it gives fossil fuel people a chance to go on and continue. I said, this is not about fossil fuel for electricity. This is about greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture. You got to decarbonize steel, chemicals, plastics, concrete, everything.
Concrete,
Yeah, 8% is concrete. You've got to decarbonize all these things. It's not going to, we don't have those technologies at the moment. It could take a decade or 3. Meanwhile, you've got the carbon in there. So you got to get it out. And so this clear-eyed, it will give fossil fuel companies longer to exist is a little bit too religious for me.
I've seen the graphs written by, these famous oil and gas consultant, right? It's sort of like plateauing in the next couple of decades at least.
Right.
You've got demand for fossil coming down from automotives, demand for fossil from petrochemicals going up. Demand for fossil from aviation still going up.
Yep.
So it's net, it's like this. It's not coming down.
Yeah. For the next 10 or 20 years, I think absolutely that's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
All the plastics to make the lightweight cars,
everything you see in a car is petrochem.
Yeah. Yeah. And so until we can, okay, so there's another technology thing. There's enough agriculture that we can start to raise agriculture for food of 8 billion going to 9 or 10, and enough for a substitute for plastics, or at least aviation fuel. But I don't think aviation fuel, I think, but the plastic thing is a real issue. Now, having said the plastic issue, because it comes out of, chemistry, as we both agree, is petrochemistry. Because you take some high energy content molecule and you're gliding downhill to make anything you want. And the last thing, and then there's this, well, it's got to be biodegradable. No. You dug something out of the ground, you do it, and you throw it in the atmosphere. No. You dig it out of the ground, use it, make sure it never goes in the atmosphere. The waste issue that's around the world, the microplastics, and all that is something of, pay attention to your garbage.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can socially re-engineer that.
You can socially re-engineer the garbage problem.
Yeah.
And it's hard technically because the competition for the petrol side of the chemicals is hard. Whether plants can make inroads, some of it, yes, but maybe not all. I don't know. But these are things where you need a realism and the fact that how the problem is really big. It is profoundly big. But like I said, it's going to spur great invention, great discovery. And in the end, it can be reversible.
Draw the picture for us for 2050. Temperature would have risen 3 degrees.
No.
How many islands would have been submerged?
No, much slower than that. I think we're talking, the 3 degree stuff we're talking about is the end of this century.
Okay.
It's reversible.
Yeah.
And we have to develop the technology that can reverse it. And so my optimism is, no, we shouldn't not talk about going above certain things.
Right.
They're going to happen. Recognize they're going to happen. Think of what's going to happen next. There's a feeling, then you give up. Well, if you give up, then what do? You just live a life like Whoopi? You give up on your children? You give it? No. You got to keep on trying. And it's really important. And my optimism is we will lick the problem, but it won't be by 2050. Maybe 2075? Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have to reverse the damage. And it is reversible. That the climate guys know. I know. And so we say, look, it's not a point of no return. It's not like you've been smoking for 30 years and you've caused all these mutations and we can't stop that nowadays. You've been smoking for 30 years, the chances of getting heart disease or lung cancer and any of this other stuff, we don't know anything medicine to stop that. We know if we get rid of the CO2 in the atmosphere and store it back underground where it came from, then things will cool down before the ocean heats up. The ocean is giving us time.
Yeah.
That's the good news. The bad news is the damage we've already done is not visible.
We'll feel it in a few decades.
You'll feel it in like you'll feel the worst of it in a half a century. Oh man. It really is like smoking or getting sunburned when you're in your 20s.
Like realizing that your cancer is caused by things you would have done 20 years ago.
Yeah, if you're like complexion, you're taking lots of divots out of your head and your face when you're 60 and 70. Right? Though the damage was done 20 through 60. Anyway, so the good news is it's reversible.
But are you suggesting that the temperature rise would be less than 2 to 3 degrees from today in 2050?
I think 2.5 degrees is almost baked in.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty bad, man.
We're only 1.2, and look how and the weather's gotten really strange.
Yeah.
At 1.2 from which is beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So you double that. Things are very nonlinear. We're beginning to appreciate how sensitive the environment is to slight changes in temperature. Who would have thought?
Wow.
But you could have known that because 4 or 5 degrees centigrade, you look back at the historical record where the continents were essentially in the same place. There was no ice in Greenland and Antarctica. You look back in those times and you know what the sea level is, but you have a fossil record because of the things that lived in the border of land and ocean. Land goes up, land goes down. So you have to average over the entire ocean. But we're talking tens of meters to 100 meters. This is crazy. Okay, so you never want to go to 3 degrees, really. But everybody says it's going to take a long time. Maybe, they're getting we're all getting alarmed. But once these glaciers start going downhill, it's a plastic deformation.
Sea level. Right.
And you don't. The only way you stop it is you got to lower the temperature.
But that's going to take half a century to see the remedy.
Yeah, but you got to understand the temperature is already baked in. If we do nothing, is invisible.
Yeah.
That's the scary part. The real effects are not visible yet.
Are we going to be able to emit carbon less than 35 gigatons by 2050 a year?
By 2050, 35.
That's kind of like the rate at which we're emitting.
No.
today.
If you include the methane, nitrous oxide,
it's
the
more?
carbon equivalent, it's more like 52 gigatons. 52.
Ouch. Is that going to come down by 2050?
It will come down. Will it go down to 30?
51?
Then we're really toast. But no, it has to be hopefully cut in half by 2050. I don't know. That's
by
pretty
way of
aggressive.
technology.
But that's pretty aggressive. To be cut in half is very aggressive.
Is that
Zero?
realistic though?
I would say it's more realistic than going to zero.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a great politically correct answer.
If we can capture 10 gigatons, that's a big deal. Okay. We will need to capture, in my humble opinion, 10 to 20, no matter what.
Will there be a technology that can capture that much per annum?
We don't have it yet.
I know, but will there be in 27 years?
27?
In 2050? Will we be able to capture carbon that much?
No. But it's a massive amount of carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And to sequester it safely.
I mean, you kind of mentioned probably 1 or 2 gigs, right?
Yeah, you want. We're trying to shoot. Okay, we're now capturing and sequestering in CO2 from oil fields. We're talking 10 megatons, going to 30 megatons.
Nothing,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, and you really want to get into the gigaton range. Okay, so will we be capturing a tenth of a gigaton in 20? Probably. A gigaton? I don't even know of a gigaton. Not 20.
Yeah, probably
Not
1 or
20.
2 gigs. Yeah.
If we're lucky, yes.
At best, yeah. Wow, we're exposed, man.
Oh, by the way, I don't count taking natural gas out of the ground, taking the CO2, using hydrogen. I'm talking about capturing from the atmosphere, right?
Okay.
Making a clean source.
Okay.
That's helpful, but the fact that you're drilling for oil and natural gas, we already know disrupts the ground and it seeps up, and then not captured for energy.
How much do you think?
It's actually measured in different oil fields. It varies from about 2% to upwards of 6-8%, depending on how mismanaged the oil and gas fields are.
Okay.
It's a lot.
Wow.
You don't even use any energy content. It's just leaking out.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sobering.
Yeah.
Having said all this, if you're a scientist doing research, you got to be optimistic because you fail most of the time.
That's a great one. That's a great one. And how many islands are exposed by 2050? I mean, by way of the expected sea level rise.
Oh, it's hard for me to say, but there's
been 1,000, right?
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be displaced. Those people will be displaced. The people. Oh, by the way, there's another thing that displaces people that's not fully appreciated. It's not the gentle rise. It's the storm surges that wipe out things. Okay. Let me give you an example of that. Okay, you get a storm surge. And if these storm surges happen every decade, it's going to displace people. If they happen every century, there's no memory. I was worried about temperature rise killing salmon in the Columbia River. They're all cold water fish, okay? And I thought, okay, that's going to happen the later part of this century. And then what happened is we had a tremendous heat wave in the western part of the United States this last summer. The temperature went really high for a week. Tons of salmon died.
Wow.
So it's those fluctuations that bite you. It's those big hurricane, storm surge, cyclones that come long before the average. And this I'm seeing with my own eyes. It's, holy smokes, I wasn't thinking about that 10 years ago. But that's these big fluctuations will cause earlier disruptions.
We're already seeing those in Southeast Asia.
Yes. You know, bigger cyclones.
Typhoons and...
It's in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Right? They're, for months. Oh, and also aided by the fact that Himalayas are melting.
Yeah.
So you get... And this physics we know. Higher temperature means more water in the atmosphere, which means more precipitation. What happens, it doesn't happen when you want it, it happens when it happens. And so that's hard to predict.
See, this is a kind of inconvenient truth that a lot of climate deniers don't believe, right? How do we deal with that denial? These deniers who keep saying that, a lot of the green gases out there are caused by natural disasters more than anything.
That's
not human.
Utter nonsense. That's arithmetic. We can make pretty good estimates, and we have satellite measurements of increases in carbon dioxide, which bear the isotopic signature of sequestered carbon, because there's no more carbon-14 in it. So that's fossil fuel, and that's arithmetic.
Yep.
Okay, and so then. So the denying it, or that it's natural and climates have changed in the past, since it's not our fault, that's the way the world works. Well, that's factually wrong. But even if it were natural, wouldn't you want to do something about it? If the land next to a coastal city is sinking due to natural causes, you'd want to do something about it. For societal reasons. But anyway, it's demonstrably factually wrong, and it's wishful thinking that you tell people, says, don't worry about it. It's not as big a deal. Don't worry about COVID. It's not as big a deal. And by the way, the vaccines don't work. That was the message being sent by President of the United States and his advisors, some of his advisors, including a person at Stanford. That, our track record of the number of people who died of COVID, it should be a national shame, embarrassment. Of a developed society, per capita, we had the most deaths, and we could have done a lot about it. It's very sad. And so...
People over science, not science over people.
Yeah. Tell them what they want to hear. Trump is a master. Tell them what they want to hear. If their lives aren't getting better, I can fix it for you. He's not really interested in fixing it, but will tell people what they want to hear. Hitler was good at that.
Yeah. What's your message to the kids and grandkids?
Don't give up hope, number one, but press your parents and your grandparents, especially those who have influence, that don't you care about me? It's your responsibility. You're handing us a much worse world. Stop it. And it means in personal habits, in any influence, and as you vote in the polls. And oh, by the way, taking a 10% hit in your income for me is not the end of the world for you. But it might be really bad for us. That personal pressure can start to move things. Right? It was one of those, I said this one once when I was Secretary of Energy and told I could never say that again. I told a bunch of senators the story. Imagine you're on your deathbed and you're surrounded by kids and grandkids. And one of your grandkids says, Grandpa, you could have done something about it. You're in a position of political influence. You could have done something about this. Didn't you love us? And I was promptly told I should never say that again to any senator. Why not? This makes him feel very uncomfortable.
That was the idea.
Yes, yes, you should feel uncomfortable if you're sacrificing someone's future for a little bit more personal greed, especially in rich countries and rich people. You know, it's very different if you're struggling to survive.
Do you sense that there needs to be a new kind of political culture in households, in schools, in social institutions, where the conversation needs to start changing, right?
Yeah.
Both for the demand side and the supply side of the game.
And it's not about you, it's about me and your grandkids.
Right. Not mortgaging the future for today.
Yeah. And there's all these sayings, you know, you don't inherit the land from your ancestors, you borrow from your children. That's very true. Ancient Native American saying, usually the indigenous people who live very close to the land have a real profound appreciation of person's impact on nature, and they're immersed in it. And so, yes, these things have to change. And there has to be a good motivation, and the rich countries have to help the poorer countries and be the early adopters and make this work.
And you're optimistic about some sort of acceleration of scientific discoveries.
I have no choice.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Look, scientists, we think we can do anything. Hey, this is a challenge. This is great. Yeah. When I'm going to stop, but when the Macondo oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and I made a suggestion that I don't know how the president learned, I think from my chief of staff, and you know, I suggested some things BP. They left. He's learned that the BP engineers laughed about it and said, you know, he may be right. So the next cabinet meeting, it's early May. He just goes up and says, Chu, go down there and help them stop the leak. Not, I want to form a committee, not any of this stuff. And so what did I want to do? I didn't want to form a committee. I said, okay, I need really out-of-the-box thinkers, original thinkers. We don't know anything about oil, but BP has access to all the petroleum engineers they need, and so we're going to go and help them. And so again, I called up, first thing of names, I called them up. Next day, they all said yes. And so, oh, by the way, great. Or sometimes they said, let me tell my department head I'm teaching a course. Or let me tell my spouse and this and that. But they all said yes. And I said, first meeting, 8 a.m. Houston, tomorrow. Because it was a national emergency. And it was a patriotic duty. It was a call to arms. And these brilliant people ended up, you know, there's only half a dozen of us. I've spent half my time down there for 2 months. And so a lot of things were offloaded. And I was actually seen there in Houston half the time. Not all the people were there half the time. Most of them were not, but they were in constant communication daily. Okay. And we did help them stop the leak.
Yeah,
but there was something about that. I said, after I saw BP screw up 2 weeks later, I said, no, I can't. This is crazy. These guys are still acting like rash cowboys. So I said, from here on in, before you do anything, we have to agree on exactly what you're going to do, and I have to buy into this. And my little group said, you don't want to do that because you take responsibility. If you're demanding that you have to approve this, that's okay. If it goes wrong and I get fired, I will have done my scientific best. We don't vote in this committee. We're here to talk to each other, and the decision's on me. I can live with that. I can assure you, no Washington bureaucrat thinks that way.
You science the heck out of that. This was a great example of how science overrules politics.
Yes.
And now we're living in an era or a world where, forgive me, but politics tends to overrule science a lot more than necessary.
When we finally figured out how to get the flange off and then we could put a tight cap on, the BP guys had to send me their blueprints.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, great. So I called people at Los Alamos and also Sandia and said, look, I got a job for you. We have these blueprints. We have the pressure of the well. We have all these things. I want you guys to go over this design with fine-tooth comb. See, is it going to fail? The pressures, the upper limit of the pressures, things like that. And they came back and said, but sir, you don't understand. It's 4th of July. It was literally the 4th of July. And I said, oh, that's right. Well, they usually have picnics. Maybe 6 o'clock, give them a call. But I'd like to know the answer in 2 days. So they worked around the clock. They came back with these detailed calculations and said, no, the steel's too thin. You got to make it thicker. This is what we get. And oh, by the way, this big 2-story thing was tipped because the boat went 45 degrees, then sank. The steel pipe, 1 mile deep, was stretching like a rubber band. This whole thing tilts 2 degrees, and then there's a swivel thing with elastomer, and it goes another 6 degrees. And they said, the biggest thing is you put this 33-ton thing on top of that, you'll break off that elastomer, and then you can never do anything until you can never seal that well from the top. And that was the message. Next day, okay, BP guys, this is it. This is the calculations. Tell me what you think. They came back and said, first, they were very impressed. Over 2-day working around the clock, these guys came in and said, we agree. You're right. And oh, by the way, we agree with this, that the risk of this snapping off is too much. So we sat there and said, okay, we can figure out how to straighten it. It's very clever because you have this thing, it tilted so much, it was hard stuck. But you can actually put little hydraulic things in there with these remotely operated, and then when it's only 2 degrees instead of 8 degrees, it will hold. And so when that was all done, the BP engineers, go ahead. They were, by this time, totally, we weren't telling the press anything. We weren't talking to anybody. We were just helping them. And they would bear everything to us. And because we were, really trying to solve it. So the cabinet was, I'd come back and I said, Steve, this must be really stressful. Every day, 24/7, CNN, you have the oil and gas coming out. You look happy. I said, yeah, I am. Because I'm using science to help solve a technical problem. I'm using my brain to solve a scientific problem. Couldn't be happier.
Wow. I'm going to ask you the last question, since I'm talking to a Nobel Prize winner. The United States has produced more than 400 Nobel laureates, disproportionately much higher than any other country. What makes it possible? And how could that inspire other countries?
Well, there are two things. First, we were rich. And we were able
It's a long way for some of us.
Hitler helped. Mussolini helped.
Yeah.
Mao helped. Okay, so there's that.
Episodic stresses help.
Yes, episodic stresses helped. But there's something else. We were rich, but also something else that Europe didn't have. You come to the United States, you can be a first generation, and you in your adopted country, you can be accepted, and your kids will be seen day one as American. You can be third or fourth generation Swiss or German, and you're considered a foreigner. So inbred in the society was this acceptance, which a few politicians these days are trying to stamp out, but that's not faith. That it's a multinational society and it was a mixing ground. And yes, you can keep your national identity and your language and everything, but you're becoming American and you're going to be accepted. And it was a meritocracy. And so that plus capital support of science after World War II was a big deal. But it was that other thing. That you come to the United States, your kids will be American, not viewed as a lens that you're not one of us. You may look different, but you're viewed as American. So that's great.
One last question. I got a few last questions. Is meritocracy at risk?
Yes.
Given how political systems are changing globally.
Yes. It's at risk for two reasons. Some of it for socially noble reasons that you want to correct social ills of decades, if not, and centuries, okay? But if you throw meritocracy completely out the door and go by fractional this and fractional that, not you as an individual, you have a problem. Because that could shred society. You're there because you are different, because you have a different race, a different background, a different this. So these are good social reasons for why you would want that. I believe in affirmative action, but affirmative action taken too far could be very bad. And oh, by the way, going back to my high school days, I didn't get into Yale and Princeton. I got into Rochester. It was the best school for me.
Turned out okay, man.
Yeah, it turned out okay. You know, it's what you make out of your life.
Yeah.
With the chances you've been given, take advantage of them. And it's, you know, so the high school, the college, that's your start of your life.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all, Obama said this many, many times. It wasn't really noticed. You know, if you want to work, there's nothing that's going to stop you. If you want to apply yourself, you have the opportunity to do everything. We want to make sure that people have the opportunity, that they're not frozen out for other reasons. Now, if you grow up poor, I'm a big believer, economically disadvantaged people, you know, this is bad. So having admissions for economically disadvantaged people who you believe, well, by the time they graduate, be as good as the rich kids, I'm all for that.
Yeah. Wow. Steve, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay.
That was Professor Steven Chu, Nobel Laureate in Physics at Stanford University. Thank you.
Inilah Endgame,